everyone, it's Seji, and today I will be talking about the books that I read for the Our Shared Shelf Book Club, which was a bi-monthly feminist book club led by Emma Watson. I'm saying was here because in January Emma announced that she is no longer picking out books for this book club, which is a shame, but I'm still happy that I was still able to at least join once. Anyway, for the months November and December, Emma chose two books actually. Both were written by Rebecca Solnit. The first one is a children's book called Cinderella Liberator, and the second is Whose Story Is This? Old Conflicts, New Chapters. Whose Story Is This is a collection of essays consisting of two parts in which Solnit makes the case that at this moment there is a battle over fundamental power in our society. She argues that women, people of colour and people from the LGBTQ+ community are trying to create their own narrative telling their stories, and that the people who are currently in power, aka white men, are trying to fight to keep their centrality. I thought this was a stunning read and definitely one of the more thought-provoking ones that I've recently read. I felt it to be both insightful and accessible. What I really like about Solnit's writing is that it's very sharp and straight to the point. Yet she doesn't sacrifice any of her prose for functionality. I thought it would actually be nice to dive a bit deeper into a couple of essays, so I've picked a few of my favorites to talk about. The introduction, called Cathedrals and Alarm Clocks, was such a strong opening. It really laid down the groundwork for what was to come and created a very straightforward picture of where our society is at right now. In this introduction, Solnit presents truths, which she uses to establish the rest of her essays. One of the more important ones is that although intangible, the social structures that we have created are incredibly powerful, and that there are people and institutions out there who use the tools that are provided by these structures in order to oppress others. What is most crucial to understand is that we do have the power to dismantle these structures and create others that are less harmful. Remembering that people made these ideas as surely as people made the buildings we live in and the roads we travel on helps us remember that first, change is possible, and second, it's our good luck to live in the wake of this change rather than asserting our superiority to those who came before the new structures, and maybe even to acknowledge that we have not arrived at a state of perfect enlightenment, because there is more change to come, more that we do not yet recognize that will be revealed. I have learned so much. I have so much to learn. The implication that we still have so much to learn is so important. Solnit points out that we are living in such a transformative time. I mean, look at the Black Lives Matter and climate change movements and #MeToo. Issues that used to be at the margins in our peripheral view are now being brought to the center. And the interesting thing about this is that we can look as late as 2010 and see what a huge shift has been made in society. But also that there is still so much work to do, so many blind spots still left to find. It's very easy to think that we were better than people who lived 100 years ago and to scoff at the barbaric things that they used to do. But it's also very important to recognize that we will be preceded by future generations and that people are most certainly going to look back on us 100 years from now and think the exact same things. After the introduction comes the titular essay of this collection. About it, Solnit says, "The title of this anthology is about the struggle of new stories to be born, against the forces that prefer to shut them out or shout us down, against people who work hard at not hearing and not seeing." A far too common response to #MeToo has been to bemoan that men feel less comfortable in their workplaces, which springs first of all from a habit of not just valuing male comfort more, but centering attention on it. Similarly, the advancement of people of color is framed by some as a loss for white people, having to make room, compete on equal terms, or just coexist with difference. It's about who matters. Specifically, when Solnit talks about white people having to compete on equal terms, I got reminded of this interview with Toni Morrison where she talks about racism and white supremacism.
If the racist white person, I don't mean the person who is examining his consciousness and so on, doesn't understand that he or she is also a race. It's also constructed. It's also made. And it also has some kind of serviceability. But when you take it away, I take your race away. And there you are, all strung out. And all you got is your little self. And what is that? What are you without racism? Are you any good? Are you still strong? You still smart? You still like yourself?
I have a link to the entire video in the description box below. I would definitely recommend you watching it. Morrison really reaches to the core of what and who exactly racism serves. Sonnet starts off Whose Story and Country Is This with a very strong point. The common denominator of so many strange and troubling cultural narratives coming our way is a set of assumptions about who matters, whose story it is, who deserves the pity and the treats and the presumption of innocence, the kid gloves and the red carpet, and ultimately the kingdom, the power, and the glory. You already know who. It's white people in general and white men in particular. Sonnet gives several examples of when a white person would do something atrocious and then how it would be framed to make people feel more sympathetic towards that person. There are countless examples of rape cases where judges were afraid to endanger the bright future of young men. Examples of white people killing innocent black folks and then being driven by the police to get some fast food afterwards. Terrorists being labeled as young troubled loners. Also, looking back at the #MeToo movement, I was surprised by how fast the narrative changed. The movement was all about exposing sexual assault and harassment and giving a voice to the victims that were previously silenced. At the start of the whole Weinstein situation, it was cheered on. But then things quickly turned south and it became about how not all men do this type of things. And the focus shifted to the discomfort of the men who now had to live in this post-Me Too era. We've heard from hundreds, perhaps thousands of women about assaults, threats, harassment, humiliation, coercion of campaigns that ended careers, pushed them to the brink of suicide. Many men's response to this is to express sympathy for men. The film director Terry Gilliam was the voice of the old ways when he said, "I feel sorry for someone like Matt Damon, who is a decent human being. He came out and said all men are not rapists, and he got beaten to death. Come on, this is crazy." Matt Damon has not actually been beaten to death. He is one of the most highly paid actors on earth, which is a significant different experience than being beaten to death. The actor Chris Evans did much better with this shift in perspective, saying, "The hardest thing to reconcile is that just because you have good intentions doesn't mean it's your time to have a voice." But the follow-up story to the #MeToo upheaval has too often been, how do the consequences of men hideously mistreating women affect men's comfort? Are men okay with what's happening? There have been too many stories about men feeling less comfortable, too few about how women might be feeling more secure in offices where harassing co-workers may have been removed, or at least a bit less sure about their right to grope and harass. And this is just another example of how the people in power are able to change the narrative, how easily they can disregard the truth in order to stay in power. In another passage, Rebecca states that it's easier to throw a woman under the bus than a culture. One of the things that recently came very apparent to me when reading this collection was that how easily it is for people, including myself, to not critically consider the content that we're consuming, not using our tools of critical thinking to assess the information that we're consuming makes us incredibly susceptible to other people's influences, and that is not a good thing. Either way, my favorite essay of the first part was called All the Rage. One of the biggest questions that I've had in my life is that when I'm feeling disgruntled over some sort of injustice, how do I get my point across without being discredited as whatever stereotype a person might use for me? How do you navigate life with rage when you're also at the same time fearing retaliation when you speak up? This essay really helped me because it didn't emphasize getting rid of my rage, but rather moving past it so that it wouldn't corrupt me. So if you're dealing with something similar, I would definitely recommend you read that essay. The second part of this collection is broader and makes observations and remarks on society. My favorite essay here was The Disaster of the Hero, in which she talks about how society likes putting one specific person at the forefront of, let's say, a movement, and then sort of forgets about all of the people that came before that person or who are behind them supporting them in the background. For instance, there are other young people fighting for climate change who walked so that Greta Thunberg could run. And saying that is by no means discrediting Greta or her work. It just points out that the people who helped lay the groundwork often get obfuscated, and then society kind of goes ahead and just picks one hero. Solnit herself says, "I was thinking about this when I was thinking about Sweden's Greta Thunberg, a truly remarkable young woman, someone who has catalyzed climate action across the world. But the focus on her may obscure that many remarkable young people before her have stood up and spoken passionately about climate change. I think it's important to recognize, as Solnit puts it, that our largest problems won't be solved by heroes. They'll be solved, if they are, by movements, coalitions, civil society. We are, for a large part, a product of our society. And so it's very important for us to recognize the magnitude of power that words and ideas have, if we ever want to continue educating ourselves and improve society." Cinderella Liberator is Solnit's feminist retelling of Cinderella. I actually never read the fairy tale, so before I picked up the story, I went ahead and read the version of the Brothers Grimm, and also the most famous one, which I believe people know from Disney, the one with the pumpkin. I think that Cinderella Liberator is a great example of work reflecting how times are changing. Reading it so close after having read the two previous versions, it becomes quite glaring how outdated they are. For instance, the idea of, in order for a woman to have a happy ending, she must find a man who is able to sustain her. I think Solnit's version also added to the depth of many of the characters. However, this was still limited seeing how short the story was. It is of course a children's book. Solnit made sure to pay attention to the animals that helped Cinderella. I do, however, feel that it was slightly pushed at times, the story paying more attention to the functionality than the aesthetics. In my opinion, Solnit was a bit too ambitious in a few areas. For instance, looking at Cinderella's parents, I personally didn't feel that they needed a storyline. Cinderella's mother is lost at sea, and so her father finds a new wife, and that's kind of like how she gets the two stepsisters. But anyway, at the end of the story, Cinderella's mother is back, and that love triangle is a whole nother story. And so yeah, we never get to know what happens to the three of those people. And so I felt that the space that that narrative took up could have better been put to use on the narrative of the prince, because I felt that at the end that kind of felt short. And there were also a few other technicalities, but altogether I do feel that this was a great attempt at a retelling of Cinderella. And apparently Solnit is doing another one of, I'm not too sure, maybe Rapunzel, maybe I'm just making this up, probably, but anyway, I'm excited to see what she will do in the next one. Either way, that's everything I had to say with regards to Whose Story Is This and Cinderella Liberator. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video. A huge thank you to Klavek, Chris, Diane, Jen, Nikolai and Tara for supporting me over on Patreon.